African woman sells her virginity to an Arab executive to pay off a debt. But what happens next will shock you. She was desperate. She was trapped. And she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss an emotional and shocking story like this one. Now, let's dive in. The city of Dubai glowed outside the towering hotel windows, a sea of golden lights stretching into the distance. Amara stood near the glass, her fingers trembling against the silk of her dress. From up here, the world below looked small, insignificant. That was how Khalid Al-Fayed saw people, wasn't it? Insignificant. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat reminding her that this was real. She had agreed to this. $50,000. It was enough to erase her mother's hospital debt, enough to stop the calls from the bank, enough to make the endless weight on her shoulders disappear. But what would it cost her? Behind her, Khalid watched in silence, seated in a sleek leather armchair. He was a man who didn't need to speak to command a room. His dark eyes held no warmth, only quiet expectation. His suit was crisp, his cufflinks gleaming under the chandelier's soft glow. He had the aura of someone used to getting exactly what he wanted. And tonight, he wanted her. The thought made her stomach twist. She had seen him before, in magazines, in the news, a ruthless billionaire, a king in the corporate world. Women draped over his arm like accessories, their faces carefully selected to match the perfection of his world. But she was not one of them. She was here for survival. "Take off your dress," Khalid said finally, his voice smooth, deep, undeniable. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Her hands clenched the fabric at her sides. This was happening. She had prepared herself for this moment, told herself she would be strong, emotionless, untouchable. But now that she was standing here, her skin burned with shame. Khalid raised an eyebrow, as if bored of her hesitation. "Are you going to make me wait all night?" His tone was even, but there was a quiet authority beneath it, the kind that didn't welcome defiance. Amara swallowed hard. She had no choice. She reached behind her back, fingers brushing the cold metal of the zipper. It felt like a trigger, like the moment she pulled it down, something inside her would break. Her body was frozen, but her mind was screaming. This is wrong. She had sold herself to a man who would forget her the moment the night was over. But before she could move, before she could force herself to do what she had promised, Khalid sighed. He stood, unbuttoning the cuffs of his sleeves, rolling them up in slow, deliberate movements. He moved like a man who controlled time itself, unbothered, untouchable. He walked toward her, his presence overwhelming, his scent a mix of wood and smoke and wealth. When he stopped just inches away, her breath caught. Khalid tilted his head, studying her. "You're afraid," he murmured. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. Amara's spine stiffened. "No," she lied. A flicker of amusement crossed his face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He lifted a hand, and for a brief, terrifying moment, she thought he was going to touch her. But he didn't. Instead, he grabbed her chin, tilting her face up until she was forced to look at him. His grip was firm, not painful, but unyielding. "Do you know why I agreed to this?" he asked, his voice low. She hated how he made her feel small. "Because you could," she bit out. Khalid smirked. "Partially." His thumb brushed over her jaw, almost thoughtfully. "But mostly, because I wanted to see if you'd actually go through with it." Amara's stomach dropped. "What?" He released her and took a step back, watching her with a cruel sort of curiosity. "This is just business to me," he said, hands in his pockets. "But to you, it's desperation." He studied her, calculating, as if deciding whether she was worth the money. "So tell me, Amara." He leaned in slightly, his voice a whisper against her ear. "Can you really do this?" Her breath hitched. Everything in her told her to run. But she couldn't, because this wasn't just about her. It was about her mother, about survival, about escaping the suffocating weight of debt. So she lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Yes." A slow, knowing smirk touched Khalid's lips. "Then prove it." The silence in the room was deafening. Amara's pulse pounded in her ears as she stood before Khalid, her back rigid, her nails digging into her palms. The weight of his stare was suffocating, unreadable, unforgiving. His challenge still hung in the air. "Then prove it." He was toying with her, testing her limits. Amara knew this wasn't just about the money anymore. Khalid Al-Fayed was a man who controlled everything, his business, his empire, the people around him. And now, her. She forced herself to breathe. Slowly, she reached for the zipper at the back of her dress. Her fingers trembled, but she kept her chin high, refusing to let him see her fear. Khalid leaned against the bar, his dark eyes watching every movement. He swirled the whiskey in his glass, unimpressed, as if he had already seen this before, like she was just another woman in a long line of those who had come before her. The thought burned. She wasn't like the others. The moment the zipper gave way, the silk of her dress loosened against her skin. A shiver ran down her spine, not from the cold, but from the weight of what she was about to do. Then, she stopped. Her hands froze halfway down. Something inside her rebelled. It wasn't the fear of intimacy. It wasn't even the shame. It was him. The way he watched her, waiting for her to break. Khalid raised a brow, amusement flickering across his face. "Having second thoughts?" His voice was smooth, almost mocking. Amara clenched her jaw. "No." Her body screamed at her to run, but her pride wouldn't let her. She had agreed to this. $50,000. Her mother needed it. She wouldn't fail now. She couldn't. Khalid placed his glass down with a quiet clink, then took slow, deliberate steps toward her. Every nerve in Amara's body tightened. He stopped just inches away, the warmth of his presence wrapping around her like a second skin. Then, he reached out, not to touch her, not yet. Instead, he lifted the strap of her dress, dragging the silk back into place over her shoulder. Amara's breath caught. What was he doing? Khalid's fingers brushed against her skin, his touch infuriatingly gentle. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter this time, dangerous in a different way. "I don't sleep with women who look like they're about to cry." Amara's eyes widened. The words cut deeper than she expected. She jerked her chin up. "I'm not crying." His gaze searched hers, as if looking for a lie. Then he smirked, cold, calculating. "Prove it," he said again. Amara wanted to hate him, wanted to claw her way out of this situation, wanted to tell him to go to hell. But she needed that money. She couldn't afford the luxury of pride. So, she steeled herself and let the dress slip down her arms, exposing the smooth curves of her collarbones, the trembling strength of her resolve. Khalid's expression didn't change. No admiration, no approval. Just indifference. Like this was nothing to him, like she was nothing. A lump formed in her throat, but she swallowed it down. This was survival. Then Khalid let out a slow breath and stepped back. Enough. Amara blinked. What? He turned away, rolling his sleeves back down, buttoning them with sharp, precise movements. You did what I asked. I'm satisfied. Her heart stopped. That was it? She had been preparing for the worst, for humiliation, for pain. But instead, he had dismissed her like a boardroom deal that no longer interested him. Her voice was barely a whisper. So, you're not? No. Khalid poured himself another drink, his posture relaxed, unaffected. You'll get your money. Amara should have felt relief. Instead, rage burned in her chest. He had made her stand there, trembling under his gaze, had toyed with her, watched her break herself down. And for what? A game? A test? Her fists clenched. You're disgusting, Khalid smirked. I never claimed otherwise. Her stomach twisted. Without another word, she grabbed her dress, pulling it back into place. She stormed past him, but before she could reach the door, his voice stopped her cold. You'll take the money. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Amara turned, fury flashing in her eyes. And if I don't? Khalid tilted his head. Then I'll double it. Her breath hitched. He wanted her to feel owned. And the worst part? She already did. The tension in the hotel suite was suffocating. Amara's body still trembled as she clutched the fabric of her dress, struggling to process what had just happened. Khalid had dismissed her, like a deal that no longer interested him, like a possession he had inspected and found unimpressive. She should have been relieved. She should have thanked the heavens that she wouldn't have to endure the humiliation of sleeping with him for money. But the way he had done it, cold, detached, as if her body, her desperation, were just another plaything for his amusement, it made her blood boil. Khalid stood by the bar, pouring himself another drink, his movements slow and deliberate. The ice in his glass clinked as he swirled it, his gaze flicking back to her, bored and unbothered. Are you waiting for something, Amara? Her jaw tightened. She hated how he said her name, like it meant nothing, like she meant nothing. I don't need your money. Khalid let out a quiet chuckle, finally turning to face her. Don't lie to me. You needed it badly enough to come here tonight. He took a sip of his drink, watching her with that unreadable expression that sent shivers down her spine. And now you'll take it. She crossed her arms, every muscle in her body screaming for her to leave, but her feet wouldn't move. Why? She demanded. Why go through all of this, if you never planned to? He raised a brow, waiting, daring her to say the words. She swallowed hard and looked away. Khalid smirked. Because I wanted to see how far you'd go. His voice was casual, almost amused. And now I know. Her breath caught in her throat. He had been testing her, pushing her to her breaking point, watching her unravel, just to satisfy some twisted curiosity. You're a monster, she whispered. He shrugged. I've been called worse. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. He wasn't even denying it. He didn't care about what he had put her through. She turned toward the door, willing herself to walk away, but then his voice cut through the air, stopping her cold. If you walk out of here without the money, I'll assume you're too proud to accept help. He took another sip of his whiskey, his tone as indifferent as ever. But if you take it, you'll prove something else entirely." She turned to him slowly, fury burning in her veins. "And what exactly am I proving?" "That you're smart enough to know when to take an advantage." He placed the glass down, stepping closer. "That you're a survivor." The words struck something deep inside her. She had been fighting her whole life. She had swallowed her pride to get here tonight, had already lost a piece of herself just standing in this room with him. Refusing the money wouldn't change what had happened. It wouldn't erase the way he had toyed with her, how he had broken her down just to watch her struggle to rebuild. Her mother needed that money. The hospital bills weren't going away. Pride wouldn't save them. She hated that he was right. He saw it in her eyes the moment she realized it too. His smirk deepened, knowing he had won, knowing she would take it despite everything. She hated him for it. "I hope you choke on your money," she spat. Khalid only chuckled, unaffected. He walked to the desk, pulled out a sleek black checkbook, and wrote the amount down with practiced ease. When he finished, he tore the check and placed it on the table between them. "Take it or leave it," he said simply, "but don't pretend you have another choice." Her nails dug into her palms as she forced herself forward. Every step felt heavier, as if she were walking toward a final betrayal of herself. She snatched the check without looking at it, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her hesitate. She wouldn't let him see that she was shaking. Without another word, she stormed toward the door. But before she could reach it, Khalid spoke again, his voice quieter this time, almost thoughtful. "I don't think this is the last time I'll see you, Amara." She froze for half a second, but she didn't turn around. She forced herself to keep moving, shoving the door open, stepping out into the dimly lit hallway. She wouldn't come back. She refused. But as the elevator doors closed around her, sealing her in the silence of her own thoughts, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. The check burned in Amara's hand like a brand. She clutched it so tightly that the edges bent, her breath unsteady as she stepped out of the luxurious hotel. The crisp night air did little to cool the fire raging inside her. Khalid Al-Fayed had toyed with her. He had broken her down, stripped her dignity, only to hand her the money as if she were nothing but a pawn in a game he had already won. Her legs felt weak as she reached the curb. The valet barely spared her a glance as he opened the door to the taxi waiting for her. She slid inside, her hands trembling as she gave the driver her address. The city of Dubai rushed past her in a blur of neon lights and towering skyscrapers. The same city that had promised her a fresh start. The same city that had swallowed her whole. She glanced down at the check. $50,000. Enough to clear her mother's hospital bills, to pay off the debts that had been suffocating them for years. But it had come at a price. Her pride. Her dignity. And worst of all, the knowledge that Khalid had seen her break. Tears burned at the back of her eyes, but she refused to cry. She had done what she had to do. She had survived. The taxi pulled up in front of the small apartment she shared with her mother. The building was old, a stark contrast to the glittering luxury she had just walked away from. As she stepped inside, the familiar scent of home wrapped around her, warm and comforting. Her mother was asleep on the worn-out couch, a blanket draped over her frail frame. Amara's heart clenched. This was why she had done it. For her. She placed the check on the small table beside her mother's medication. Her hands still shook as she traced the ink, her name scrawled beside Khalid's signature. She had thought the money would bring relief, but all she felt was emptiness. Her mother stirred, her tired eyes blinking open. "Amara?" Her voice was soft, laced with exhaustion. Amara forced a smile. I have the money, Mama. Everything's going to be okay now. Her mother frowned, sitting up slowly. How? Amara's stomach twisted. She had no answer. No lie that would be convincing enough. Her mother reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. My beautiful girl, she whispered, her voice filled with knowing. What did you do? Amara pulled away, standing too quickly. It doesn't matter, she said, forcing steel into her voice. You're safe now. That's all that matters. Her mother didn't argue. She only looked at her with sad, tired eyes. Amara turned away before the guilt could swallow her whole. She needed air. Stepping out onto the tiny balcony, she let the night breeze wash over her, cooling the heat of shame still clinging to her skin. And then, as if summoned by her thoughts, her phone vibrated. Her chest tightened. She knew who it was before she even looked. She stared at the screen. A message from him. Her fingers hovered over the phone, but she didn't open it. She had told herself she would never see him again. But deep down, in the part of her she didn't want to acknowledge, she knew the truth. Khalid Al-Fayed wasn't done with her. And worse, some twisted part of her wasn't done with him either. Amara stared at the message glowing on her phone screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She told herself she wouldn't open it. She told herself that Khalid Al-Fayed no longer existed in her world. But the moment stretched too long, the weight of curiosity pressing down on her until her thumb betrayed her. One unread message. Khalid, I trust you made it home safely. Her stomach clenched. There was no mockery in the words, no cruel game, just a statement. But coming from him, it felt like something more. A reminder. A claim. She should ignore him. She should block his number, delete the message, erase every trace of him from her life. But instead, her fingers tightened around the phone. Why had he reached out? He had gotten what he wanted. He had seen her break. He had won. So why was he still haunting her? She locked the screen and set the phone down as if it had burned her. The night air wrapped around her, but it did little to ease the storm inside. She had the money. Her mother was safe. The nightmare was over. So why did she feel like something had just begun? A soft rustling behind her made her turn. Her mother stood in the doorway of the balcony, her frail frame silhouetted by the dim light inside. You're not sleeping? Her mother asked gently. Amara forced a small smile. I was just thinking. Her mother stepped closer, studying her face in the way only a mother could, seeing past the surface, straight into the cracks. You haven't been the same since you left tonight. Amara looked away. It doesn't matter. Her mother sighed, reaching out to brush a stray curl from Amara's face. Whatever you did to get that money, I won't judge you. I just want to know that you're okay. A lump formed in Amara's throat. She wasn't okay, but she had to be, for her mother. So she forced another smile, one she didn't feel. I'm fine. Her mother didn't believe her, but she didn't press. Instead, she pulled Amara into a gentle hug, her touch filled with a warmth that made the cold inside her feel even more unbearable. Get some sleep, my love. Amara nodded numbly, watching as her mother retreated back inside. She turned back to the night sky, but the city lights felt too bright, too suffocating. She picked up her phone again. Her thumb hovered over Khalid's message. Then, against every ounce of her better judgment, she typed 2 words. Amara. Why do you care? She hit send before she could take it back. Seconds passed. then minutes. Just when she thought he wouldn't reply, her phone vibrated. One new message. Khalid. You intrigue me. Her pulse spiked. She should delete the conversation. She should shut this down now. Instead, she typed back. Amara, find someone else to entertain you. This time, his reply came instantly. Khalid. I don't like being told what to do. She let out a sharp breath, gripping the phone tighter. This was a game to him. A game she should never play. And yet, as she stood on that balcony, staring at his words, she felt it. The pull. The undeniable gravity of Khalid Al-Fayed. And she had no idea how to escape it. Amara lay awake long after her mother had gone back to sleep, staring at the ceiling as Khalid's words echoed in her mind. You intrigue me. She should have ignored him. She should have never replied. But she had. And now, a door had been left slightly open, a door he had no intention of closing. Her phone vibrated again. She turned onto her side, hesitating before picking it up. Khalid, meet me tomorrow, noon. No question, no request, just a command. Her fingers curled into a fist. Who did he think he was? Did he believe she was still at his beck and call? She had taken the money. The transaction was over. Yet something inside her hesitated. A part of her wanted to type back, to tell him exactly where he could shove his arrogance. But the part that frightened her most, the part that she refused to acknowledge, wanted to see him again. She locked her phone and placed it face down on the nightstand. She wasn't going. She wouldn't. And yet, when noon arrived the next day, she found herself standing in front of a luxury cafe in the heart of Dubai. Her reflection in the glass doors mocked her. She had worn her best dress, a fitted ivory piece that hugged her curves without being too revealing. Why had she put in the effort? Because Khalid got under her skin, and she hated it. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The cafe was quiet, the kind of place where the ultra-rich gathered to talk business over imported coffee and pastries too expensive to eat. She spotted him immediately. Khalid Al-Fayed. He sat at a private table near the back, dressed in a tailored black suit, his jacket draped over the chair. His sleeves were rolled up just enough to reveal the expensive watch on his wrist. He exuded power without effort, his posture relaxed but commanding. His eyes lifted the second she stepped inside, locking onto her with quiet satisfaction, as if he'd known she would come. That realization made her stomach tighten. She walked toward him, her steps careful, refusing to show any hesitation. As she reached the table, she folded her arms. I wasn't going to come. Khalid smirked. And yet, here you are. Her jaw clenched. She hated how he always had the upper hand. A waiter appeared, but Khalid didn't even acknowledge him. Coffee for the lady, he said smoothly, not even bothering to ask if she wanted anything. Amara slid into the seat across from him, resisting the urge to glare. You don't get to summon me whenever you feel like it. Khalid leaned back, his dark eyes studying her. I disagree. She exhaled sharply. What do you want, Khalid? His smirk faded slightly, replaced by something more unreadable. To understand you. Her brows furrowed. Excuse me? Khalid tilted his head, as if amused by his own curiosity. Women throw themselves at me all the time, Amara. You were different. You didn't beg, you didn't manipulate, and most importantly, you weren't afraid of me. She stiffened. I was never supposed to be your entertainment. His gaze darkened. I don't waste my time on entertainment. The weight of his words pressed against her chest. Silence stretched between them as the waiter returned, setting her coffee down before quickly retreating. Khalid took a slow sip of his espresso before setting the cup down. "I assume you cashed the check?" She looked away. "It wasn't a gift." His lips twitched. "No, it wasn't." She hated this. The push and pull. The way he unraveled her with just his presence. She needed to leave. She reached for her purse, but before she could stand, his next word stopped her cold. "I have another offer for you." Her pulse quickened. "I'm not for sale." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Not like that." She hesitated. "Then what?" Khalid leaned forward, his eyes burning into hers. "Be my wife." The air vanished from her lungs. She stared at him, convinced she had misheard. Then he smirked. "You look surprised." "Because I am," she hissed, keeping her voice low. "Is this a joke?" "Not at all." Amara's heart pounded. "You can't be serious." Khalid took another sip of his espresso, completely unbothered. "I need a wife. You need stability. It's a fair deal." Her body locked up. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But the way he watched her, the way he waited for her response, told her it absolutely was. Amara's breath caught in her throat. The world around her blurred. The cafe, the murmurs of conversation, the clinking of glasses, all fading into nothing. She searched Khalid's face for any sign that this was a cruel joke, but all she saw was calm certainty. He meant every word. "You want me to marry you?" Her voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. Khalid leaned back in his chair, unfazed. "Yes." She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Are you insane?" A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "Possibly." Her fingers curled around the edge of the table. "Why me?" He studied her, his gaze sharp, analyzing. "Because I need someone who knows how to play a role. Someone who isn't attached to my money, who doesn't come with expectations." He tapped a finger against the table. "And you intrigue me." Amara's stomach twisted. That word again. She shook her head. "No, absolutely not." Khalid exhaled, as if he had expected her resistance. "Think carefully, Amara." His voice was smooth, steady, dangerous. "You still need money, stability, a way out of your current life." Her throat tightened. "I already got my way out. You paid me." That was for a single night. He leaned forward. "I'm offering you something more." Her heart pounded so loudly it echoed in her ears. "And what do you get out of this?" He tilted his head. "A wife. A convenient one." Her pulse jumped. Convenient for what? Khalid's smirk deepened. "To keep certain people off my back." Amara's mind raced. This wasn't about love or attraction. This was business. A transaction, like everything else in his world. And yet, she couldn't walk away. Not yet. Her lips parted, but before she could speak, Khalid's voice dropped lower, his next words sending a shiver down her spine. "You have 3 days to decide." Then, as if the conversation had never happened, he stood, dropped a few bills on the table, and walked away, leaving Amara completely, utterly speechless.